I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Galen, Matt, Gunnar, Mark, Simon, Alexander, Catherine, G, Tilo, Emilia, Jeremy, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mershan, Galen, Gareth, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Will, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H, Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. As always, before we begin this edition of the show, I'd like to remind you that you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com if you appreciate the work here I do at Parallax Views. That would be greatly appreciated. Even the smallest donations help, and it will help to keep this show going if you give me a little bit of financial support. Assuming you appreciate the show, that would, again, mean a lot to me. So, again, patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. If you want to support the show, go there, make a donation, monthly donation, anything from $1 to $15 really helps me out. Now, with that out of the way, last month I spoke to Tina Nguyen, author of the MAGA Diaries. She initially was involved in the sort of right-wing media world. She's a former MAGA supporter, someone that was involved in MAGA media. Lately, she's been the, resident MAGA Whisperer at Puck News, and I reached out to her when I found out that she has a very interesting take on Project 2025. She argues that it's been maybe a little bit over-focused on, and that people should probably put their attention on another Trump-affiliated think tank, namely the America First Policy Institute. And she may be onto something because Linda McMahon, who is heading up Trump's transition team, happens to be a major player in the America First Policy Institute. So we're going to be talking about Trump and the America First Policy Institute, as well as the right-wing media ecosystem, which she has particular insights into for the reasons I mentioned earlier. She used to be involved in right-wing MAGA-related media. We'll discuss that and much, much more. So, with that being said, let's get right to it with Tina Nguyen. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very happy to be speaking with. She's taken some time out of her day to talk with us about the America First Policy Institute. Tina Nguyen is the author of the MAGA Diaries, and she's become sort of the MAGA Whisperer for much of the mainstream media. And, I think the book is a very interesting book that gives a deep insight into sort of the ecosystem of the conservative media sphere. How are you doing, Tina?
I am so tired. I was literally thinking maybe if Kamala won, I would have opened a plant store, but you know what? We're in this world now, so I'm doing great.
So this book you wrote, the MAGA Diaries, it's a memoir, and I want to get into that first before we get into AFPI, but maybe you can give a little bit of your background and how you became involved in the Daily Caller and the sort of conservative world.
Yeah, so my path into journalism went through this very weird side journey that dipped into conservative academia, conservative media, and more importantly, the structures and organizations that make up the American right and keep filling it with young ideologues and activists and eventual future leaders from the 1960s onwards. So I ended up in mainstream media around the time that Trump got elected. And when people started hearing about my background, they're like, wait, what did you get up there? Like, you're a woman, you're a minority, your parents went to Harvard. Like, what? How? Why? And deciding to tackle the topic through a memoir rather than just like an academic book, it was like, one, way more fun for me just as a writer, but two, I think shows the thought process and the factors that lead to someone in my position becoming a professional right winger. Like it's about resources, it's about social status, it's about how you view the promise of America, how you don't. And so that just gave me a lot of insight into a world that frankly confuses a lot of people right now. And I really loved writing it.
What's the, if I can ask, because I've known a few conservatives that went from like being university students to working the conservative student paper to becoming part of the Daily Caller. What's the like pipeline? How has that all worked out? How do they sort of recruit the students and then get them into that ecosystem?
It's a lot of older people who are powerful and influential kind of gravitating to you and going, wow, you're really talented and super smart. Man, you know what? You should come do like this thing real quick. And this thing real quick ends up becoming a scholarship to a conference where you get to meet people who are doing the same thing you are. It turns into a scholarship to do a summer job over that's an internship and paid, which is crazy, especially as a journalist. Then it turns into a job out of college. Then it turns into a career and a network and a full ass life. Um, and I think the moment that you kind of realize that you've committed yourself to an ideology that's not just, a thing that you believe, but part of your professional life and your social life, it's a lot harder to pull yourself out of it.
Are you
But
sort
it
of
starts
stuck in a
really
world where
early.
you're only talking to people that agree with you, sharing the same news sites, things like that?
A little bit, yeah. And around the time that I did conservative journalism was the growth of the internet as a source of news. So Drudge Report, Breitbart was launching. Uh, the Daily Caller had launched in 2010. HuffPost was around, and conservatives had long had to accept that the mainstream media was the only source of information that was broadly viewed and accepted by everyone as factual information. And there were like print magazines that were conservative skewing, but they were branded as the conservative pro America magazine, like Weekly Standard, National Review. The moment that the internet comes into play, you start the movement started realizing, oh, we have a much easier opportunity with much lower overhead to reach a bigger and broader audience. We're not limited by the medium of print anymore. We can just go, 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 go. So once that information becomes more easily accessible and there's more writers and more journalists producing this kind of content, like the rest of the conservative world started reading those outlets exclusively simply because they were already primed to believe that the mainstream media was biased already. And they're like, oh my God, here are some people doing good work. They reflect our view of reality. Um, so it just kind of built really rapidly on itself for the past decade.
It sort of builds into this like self-sustaining echo chamber, essentially. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the first big magazine profiles I ever did was for Vanity Fair back in 2018 or so about the growth of Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire as an actual business. Back then, everyone was going, "Oh my God, there's this podcaster with the podcast who's conservative and young. Oh my God!" And then I thought, no, okay, no, there's something very big going on here because I visited their offices for like a social visit, and they had sunk so much money into studios and offices and lighting even. And coming from a world that was like IKEA furniture like flung into a room, it was like there's there's something very like ambitious about this project. And the more I dug into the Daily Wire as a business, the more that this business model emerged, which was we need to create a conservative online business media conglomerate, a network built around individual brands, not necessarily around a single product, because Ben Shapiro as a brand has much more protection as a source of revenue and income than the Daily Wire as a large institution. But if you have Ben Shapiro and then you have Andrew Knowles building his audience over here, or Candace Owens building her audience over there, it's highly diversified. But then you have the same audience and the same network, like feeding in back on each other. You have Ben Shapiro going on to these other networks and podcasts. So now he's coming back to him. It's it's the type of online media network that ends up creating the ecosystem that got Donald Trump back into the White House to begin with, that completely snuck underneath the noses of the mainstream media. Just this network of completely alternate information that was virulently against the mainstream.
And very much a well-oiled machine too, I would take it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a lot of money in it and a lot of smart people who know the internet real good.
So shifting from that angle of things, maybe we can tie back to it later with talk about Tucker Carlson and maybe Joe Rogan. I want to talk a little bit about this America First Policy Institute, because I know a lot of people are worried about Project 2025, but you said there's a big misconception about Project 2025 and it involves AFPI.
Oh, yeah. Project 2025 is a red herring. I have been screaming this for a year. No one listens to me because everyone thinks, oh, it's Project 2025. Oh, it's the Heritage Foundation. Ooh, it's so scary. And here's like a 900-page document. Uh, they're nerds, and the Trump administration genuinely does not like that part of the conservative movement. But if you want to go to a smarter, deeper level about it, the existence of the groups behind Project 2025 are the conservative network that I'm talking about earlier, like the Heritage Foundation, which has been around since the 70s. Then you get to the smaller ones like Claremont, Goldwater, uh, insert group here. I think Tea Party Patriots, Moms for Liberty, whatever. But and the idea was like, okay, we realized that the administrative state and the bureaucracy got in Trump's way during his first administration. So we are going to build out this entire like policy paper, but more importantly, and this is the thing that doesn't get to people's attention, we're going to build a database of people who we are going to vet for these jobs that Trump is going to appoint one day. And when you have thousands of people who are vetted by the Heritage Foundation to go into the White House, that means, at least in Trump's logic, that there is an entire different institution that is trying to exert power over him. An institution that has its own donors, that has its own history, the kind of place that like Reagan took a lot of cues from when he was president. And the split that I saw early on, though, was the existence of the America First Policy Institute, which was invited to be part of 2025, and they said no. And then they started their own thing a couple months later. And that like created this massive, oh my God, what's happening? There's a fight inside the conservative world. And AFPI is specifically built to be a think tank for Trumpism, for MAGA. And, how think tanks are basically places where you park old officials while they have a semi-retirement to turn out like papers and maintain influence. And then you have a whole bunch of young people who are like, I want to be a member of a movement. And they're ambitious and they want to have a job one day. So they like flood in there as well. AFPI deliberately understood that what Trump was looking for in his next administration was not conservatism in the way that one might understand it under Reagan or Bush or whatever, but they wanted loyalists. And so this was their attempt and statement of, we are loyal to Trump. We will not be joining that thing over there. That is stupid. And Trump sees that. Trump saw that like pretty aggressively and blatantly. And right now with his appointments, you are seeing no one from Project 2025 reach the highest levels. John Ratcliffe, who was just appointed head of, I believe, the CIA, is actually an AFPI person. And even though AFPI and Project 2025 are two different groups, Project 2025 cannot be implemented if Project 2025 people are not in charge.
I see.
And if the AFPI, yeah, if AFPI people are in charge, that means that if for some reason, a Project 2025 person ends up in the administration, that person will be layered over them. And the AFPI person can tell the P25 person, no, get your ass out of there. I am firing you. You suck. You are trying to pull a Ron DeSantis on us and sneak your Ron DeSantis shit in here. Get out. Get out now.
What real quick, if my listeners don't know your reference there, what do you mean by pulling a Ron DeSantis?
Ron DeSantis. So here's an interesting bit of juicy drama. The Project 2025 was built to be an administration in waiting for any Republican president. They were like, it's Trump, it's DeSantis. We don't care. We've got this entire thing built out and you can toss it in there on day one. Yay, we're saving America. However, they made a bet that Ron DeSantis was going to be president. And they made that so obvious that when the project was announced at a heritage event, that event was keynoted by Ron DeSantis. And that's a clear symbol of like, we believe the future of the Republican Party is Ron. And this may feel like ages ago, but Trump hates Ron DeSantis. Trump really, really, really hated Ron DeSantis. And anyone who had been affiliated with him in some way, Trump kind of dumps on. So the moment that Project 2025 kind of lost out in the public, like in Trump's eyes, they doubled down on their publicity efforts. So the rest of the media would freak out and go, oh, Project 2025. Oh. The Democrats were smart enough to glom onto Project 2025 as a talking point. Unfortunately, not smart enough. And the fact that Trump was so militant about pushing Project 2025 away from him is not reflective of him like having to do that to elect people. It's genuine. Like, he does not want people with a separate agenda who won't obey him coming into his government. He only wants loyalists.
So it sounds like we may see some of these Project 2025 people in positions in a Trump government, but they would be like lower positions. What's the difference, I guess, between the AFPI and the Heritage Foundation Project 2025? Is it just a matter of the Trump loyalty thing? Like, how does the agenda differ?
Loyalty is a massive part of it, but when you start looking at it closely, it's more about like who is loyal to Trump now versus who existed beforehand, had a lot of power, and then has to bend itself to be Trumpy. Heritage is the latter group. Heritage has been around since Goldwater. When you think of everything that Reagan ever did, the Heritage Foundation had a huge hand in that. But they had such a big hand that on day one of the Reagan administration, they literally dropped this massive binder of policy positions on his desk and went, here you go, Mr. President, here's what you should do. And that's what he did. And ever since that, every Republican president who's come into Washington has had to win Heritage's support. Every ambitious Republican politician, and too. And that means that when you're Trump, you're new, you're coming into Washington, you're taking down the establishment. The establishment is Heritage on the right.
So in other words,
not.
What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, heritage is the establishment, and AFPI, technically speaking, is not.
Okay. So there could be things that Trump wants to enact that he doesn't feel the Heritage Foundation people will necessarily go with. Hence, you have the AFPI people instead. That's what I'm getting.
Exactly. Yeah. One way that one of my sources put it was, imagine that Trump, for some reason, decides to bring back the Muslim ban. Now, when he did the Muslim ban the first time, a bunch of people had to dial it back, like pull it back, being like, "It is unconstitutional. You can't do it like that, Mr. President." Heritage people would be like, okay, yeah, I know we want that, but you have to obey the Constitution in order to make that happen. So you can't do it immediately. Here's a whole bunch of stuff you have to go to. An AFPI person would be, yes, sir, Mr. President, right away, and then figure out some way to get it into action exactly how Trump wanted it.
So I want my listeners to know this. Who are the people behind this America First Policy Institute? Because I know that I first came across it because that wrestling promoter's wife, Linda McMahon, is part of it. But there's a few figures
Mm-hmm.
involved, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
who are the heads of it?
Kellyanne Conway was one of the founding members. Chad Wolf, who was acting DHS secretary, is part of it. John Ratcliffe, who I mentioned earlier, has just got appointed to the Trump cabinet, big member. Uh, like you'll find a lot of people in AFPI who either were making a bet that this was the organization that would have the best access to Trump, or people who looked at the rest of the conservative policy scene, said, not really my thing, and joined that one instead. And they have a lot of money. I think they've been like secretly fighting donors, like fighting Project 2025 for donors behind the scenes for a while. And he recently signed this massive, actually, no, I can't report that yet. Strike that. Um, but but yeah, the entire pitch to donors was, we're going to have access to the next administration. AFPI's was like, we are betting that it's Trump. So we are going to keep building this administration in exile that is for him. Um, Granted, Trump did not like the idea of anyone having any influence over who he ended up putting in. Um, to say nothing of a wealthy outside group that was trying to like worm its way through the front door. But in the loyalty piece, AFPI has the leg up.
In terms of, and we could talk about JD Vance and whatnot, but what do you think the biggest concerns people should be uh, examining right now? Like, what are the biggest concerns with the second Trump presidency with Trump and the AFPI?
I don't know exactly how much power AFPI specifically will have. They'll certainly have people in the White House, but they will know enough to be like, okay, look, I have this idea of what I want to happen, but if the president says no, okay, I'm dropping it. Sure, whatever you say goes, Mr. Trump.
They're going to be
But
lackeys, essentially.
that's what Trump is really aiming for here. Like, some people will come off as serious and sober, some people will be absolute, like, out of left field, some people will be Matt Gaetz, but like the only thing that Marco Rubio and Matt Gaetz have in common in the Trump cabinet is, when push comes to shove, they will say, yes, sir, Mr. President, I will do it. And that is what you have to pay attention to.
Okay, so we have to pay attention to the sort of kiss the ring factor because that's what these guys are going to be doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
So then, with regards to JD Vance, I know you've kept an eye on him. Uh, what do you think we have to? Is there anything that maybe people are missing about Vance and his role in Trump world?
If we're going back to the original framework of the Trump administration, which was a whole bunch of different people fighting for Trump's attention and favoritism, uh, you can consider JD Vance and Don Jr. to be sort of their own faction of what I'd call extremely online people. So the people who are much more attenuated to the power of the internet, to podcasters, to memes that are floating around, their philosophy has always been the internet is where the internet, and particularly Twitter, is the most open public commons. Like, this is where all the debates are happening. This is where we know everyone from multiple different sides of the aisle are. Um, and we've got to listen to what it is that they are saying in order to, reflect what the people actually want. And to that end, they've got a lot of connections with the podcasters and the online internet figures and the influencers that were so crucial in getting Trump over the finish line with young people. And granted, JD Vance is only the vice president, and dating back to John Adams, the vice president notoriously has no actual power. But if he's allied with Don Jr. and Don Jr. is able to get to the president, and weirdly, Barron Trump has become Trump's Zoomer whisperer. If those guys are in an alliance, they are able to get Trump's lizard brain to do the thing that they want him to do that day. But their goal is primarily online stuff, discourse.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to ask you, and I just want to get a sense of this because I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I sometimes look at MAGA and I feel like it's a very disparate sort of grouping of different people with different interests. So I've known MAGA people that like their big concern is foreign policy and sort of this isolationist foreign policy or anti-interventionism. And then I know other people that are concerned with protectionism and tariffs. Then there's others that are just libertarians. I guess what can we expect? I mean, what's the vision that MAGA has? Because at times it seems like there's competing factions within it.
Oh yeah, MAGA is always about competing factions. Like that is just like that's a feature, not a bug of the American right to begin with, and MAGA even more so because one of the currencies of MAGA world is attention and influence measured by like clicks and spread. So the only thing they would really have in common is a profound anti-elitism and an inherent distrust of people in power saying you should do this because rationale, study, higher appeal to do. Um, and if Trump being elected a second time with the popular vote proves anything, is that this anti-elitism is super powerful and it is able to bring a bunch of people together to go to like combat what they believe is an establishment. Now, you can probably, if you're in the establishment, you can probably like distract from. If you're in the establishment, you kind of don't like the idea of people saying we hate you and you specifically because you are wrong. So I think in the next several months, you're certainly going to have a lot of explanations from larger media about, oh, Trump voters are racist, Trump voters are sexist, Trump voters like hate trans people. Um, Certainly there are elements of the entire MAGA movement that cite that as their biggest pet peeve slash issue. But Trump bringing them together under one kind of Rorschach blot of a president is very powerful.
Can we expect that Trump will maybe play different factions of MAGA against each other? I'm already seeing it a little bit with I know some MAGA people that aren't happy with Rubio getting a
Mhm.
position, but they like Tulsi. And it seems like I feel like he's doing this on purpose in some ways.
Yeah, it's to make everyone and no one happy. Uh, like on the one hand, like it's a nod, like appointing Rubio is a nod to the neocons, going, you know what? Yeah, I get you. We can maybe do war. I will consider maybe doing an international war. Uh, but Tulsi is DNI. Is it DNI? I think it's DNI.
Yes, yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
she's DNI. Yeah, but like Tulsi, as the person in charge of the intelligence committee, is a big what not to the libertarians. Uh, and but ultimately, Trump has portrayed himself as a businessman and a, you know, deal maker and someone who is able to like exert his will and no one else can say no. This is like, bizarro like team of rivals stuff.
Last thing I want to touch upon with you is that, and maybe I've been guilty of even downplaying it, but I know a lot is made out of Joe Rogan. I've seen a lot of people say he helped get Trump elected. I think a lot is made out of Tucker Carlson, and I agree with that because I think Carlson has guided a lot of discourse. But how much should we be paying attention to the online discourse?
Oh, you have to pay so much attention to the online discourse. I mean, just like sheer numbers alone, the number of people who are subscribed to Joe Rogan on Spotify, just Spotify, 14.5 million. Fox News at its primetime hours only gets 3.3 on a really good day. And the more important thing about Rogan is the retention rate. Like this man does a 2 to 3 hour podcast, sometimes goes well beyond that, but people listen to the entire thing. People pay attention to the substance of the entire thing. And that is a factor that cannot be ignored, not just like who's clicking on your show and watching it, but like who is staying with you because they trust you. Like one of the things I've been telling people is that Kamala turning down Rogan's very specific format was so stupid. And the audience knows that it is stupid because Rogan will, like, you can't pitch Rogan on yourself. He has to who's you. You can have like a lot of people like banging down the doors asking to be on Rogan, but he has to be interested in you. Two, the reason people love Rogan is because they like that very long format and it kind of breaks down people's like, desire to like it breaks down people's structure and rehearsedness just by sheer force of time and will. And by the end of it, you are your most genuine self. It's sort of like Hot Ones, but like stretched out over time. And if you are not aware of people's desire to listen to Rogan, who specifically like that about Rogan, you clearly do not want to like listen to a normal person who has, qualms about the day, at least to the Rogan listener.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, Rogan's an interesting case because I feel like he himself is pretty uh, politically incoherent, but I think that the sort of Charlie Kirks of the world have seized upon that and that they take the opportunity to speak to his audience, which, to me, that was the real issue with Rogan's show. I mean, I would have been
Mm-hmm.
fine with Harris going on there, but it seems like the right has sort of taken advantage of the opportunities he's given them.
It's because the right's way better at understanding the power and reach of the internet, like I've been saying for like 8 years.
I also mentioned Tucker Carlson, that's the last thing I want to cover with you is how much should we be paying to Tucker Carlson? Yeah, and what is going on with his like whole, saying he's attacked by demons thing? What's the play there?
He's actually been drifting down the path of Christian nationalism for a while. Like one of the precipitating incidents that led him to being kicked out from Fox. Um, no one can really point to whether this was the incident, but it was one of several incidences that occurred around the same time. Was him giving a speech to a heritage donor meeting that was live cast, in which he said that America was under spiritual attack by forces of darkness. This was maybe 2023, and Rupert reportedly saw that, freaked out because he doesn't personally like extremely Jesus talk on his show, but that sort of signaled to me the start of Tucker's fairly legitimate spiritual journey into a more into a space that is more Christian nationalist adjacent, QAnon adjacent, that believes very sincerely that American is a beacon of light and it is the good Christian thing to push back against Biden and Kamala. This is something I ended up writing about in my book too. I ended up going to this place called the Patriot Church in the middle of nowhere, and I saw the really early stages of path of people starting to buy into this kind of talk. The crazy thing about that too is that it was a room full of maybe 20 people at some senior center in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, but this woman was live streaming it the entire time. Like, that's how insistent diehard Christian right MAGA voters are to get that message out.
These Christian sort of nationalist types, I mean, when I think of, the Christian right, I think of people that do they believe in all this like sort of spiritual warfare type thing that Carlson believes in? I mean, they seem to be in that sort of Alex Jones-esque world. And how dangerous is that, I guess?
If the point of weaponizing your Christian beliefs is to turn them against a secular institution like the government, then yeah, I would say that that drifts into the realm of severe instability. I have the feeling there's some right winger maybe listening to your podcast trying to record everything that I'm saying and going, oh no, Tina's going to here's something we can cancel Tina with. Kind of reminds me of jihad.
In closing, what do you hope my listeners get out of this conversation that we've been having here? And maybe you could promote how listeners can keep up with your work and purchase the book.
Okay, that's a lot of things at once. First takeaway: there's many levels to what Trump's about to do, and you are not going to be able to understand it by simply looking at one document that some complete outsider group made. Two, the internet is going to be driving a lot of Trump's decisions. Internet brain rot, internet discourse, conspiracy theories, what have you. But he'll ultimately be driven by his own instinct. And three, you can follow me by subscribing to my column at puck.news, the best and the brightest. And the MAGA Diaries is available wherever books are sold.
Thanks again,
I also
Tina.
do the audiobooks. So if you like listening to me talk just now, I narrate my own audiobook.
Okay, audiobooks are the best, so I will have to check that out. Thank you again, Tina, for coming on Parallax Views.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, if you support the work here I do at Parallax Views, consider supporting me at patreon.com/Parallax Views. One more time, that's patreon.com/Parallax Views. Your support would be greatly appreciated at this time. I do not like to paywall content, so, if you care about this show and you care about that free content, I really recommend that you support me on that Patreon page. Also, you'll get the Parallax vlog with C. Derek Varn and I. We discuss a number of different topics, usually related to current events, but also pop culture. You can only hear that on the Parallax Views Patreon. So, if you can, support me there at patreon.com/Parallax Views. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.